The tampon king gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps.
But I think that, but I can't get past the core fact about Walz, which is he presided over, allowed the biggest city in the state to get burned down.
And seemed to not only allow it, but kind of
we liked it.
Support it, you know?
Yeah, did you see the video of his wife saying, I kept the windows open so I could smell the burning rubber from the riots?
I did not see that.
The wife whose hand he shook.
Oh my God. By the way, I mean, I know it's picking on a little thing, but who the hell shakes their wife's...
What does it say about a man who offers his wife of 30 years a formal, stiff handshake on stage? That uncomfortable moment, which went viral online, involved Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and quickly sparked speculation that it might signal something deeper. On the surface, Walz presents Minnesota as an extension of himself, calm, confident, and almost excessively polite, the kind of demeanor that seems to avoid confrontation at all costs. His public persona exudes a serene, almost sleepy assurance, but the viral handshake hinted at a different reality. Commentators like Tucker Carlson and Greg Gutfeld picked up on the moment, framing it as more than a simple misstep. To them, it appeared as though Walz was managing slow-moving chaos behind the scenes while keeping a carefully rehearsed smile fixed for the cameras, less the image of a decisive leader, more a controlled performance. That handshake, brief and seemingly minor, became a symbol of a larger tension, the gap between the polished public image and what might lie beneath. In a culture where politicians are expected to display affection and unity with their spouses on stage, even a fleeting gesture can reveal cracks in that carefully maintained facade, that carefully cultivated, friendly facade wasn't the only thing to crack in 2020 when Minneapolis erupted during the riots. The city seemed to teeter on the edge of total destruction. Governor Tim Walz faced a true make-or-break moment, and by most accounts, his response fell short. Fires raged for days, and blocks around the 3rd Precinct police station were reduced to ash and rubble as crowds surged in and out. Footage from the chaos is striking, yet Walz's reaction struck many as painfully slow and oddly detached. Commentators like Greg Gutfeld went further, suggesting that Walz's response wasn't just incompetence, it carried the unsettling tone of passive agreement, as if he implicitly condoned what was happening. Such claims paint a picture of a governor who viewed the pandemonium less as a crisis and more as some kind of moral or societal test. The perception only worsened when a video surfaced of Gwen Walz, the governor's wife, saying she had kept her windows open to smell the burning rubber from the riots. Whether it was genuine or a misjudged attempt at humor, the moment came across as tone-deaf amid widespread fear and destruction.
Politico lingers on candidates' fingers and defend Walz's wide eyes as they claim beards are for bad guys. Tyler, speaking of beards, and I mean the one on your face, not the one that you hang out with.
Let me just say that Walz and every other governor who did anything like that is a monster, and I think on some level he will be punished for it. But no, I admire what you did enough that I hope I'd be man enough to do it myself. I took minor risks during COVID by pointing out things that seemed true to me, but I didn't do anything that heroic. I think it's absolutely essential. Clearly, we're moving toward an authoritarian state. I think we've already arrived. I think your life is a testament to that.
Wait, you lost because you weren't woke enough? That's like telling Joy Behar she's not eating enough Doritos. That's like Jasmine Crockett saying, I gotta black this up. That's like Bud Light saying, hey, you know what? We could use more Dylan Mulvaney.
While much of the city struggled, two prominent figures remained safely at home. Long after the flames were extinguished, the repercussions lingered. Reports indicate that over 40% of Minneapolis police force left their posts, citing fear rather than commitment. Critics argue that the riots were more than a single outbreak of unrest. They signaled a deeper collapse in public safety, exacerbated by a governor who appeared more focused on appeasing progressive audiences than protecting the citizens under his charge. It seemed as if another fire was just beginning, and Minneapolis was still smoldering. Amid the pandemic, Governor Tim Walz was also tasked with overseeing the state's economy, a responsibility that some say he handled with a harsh, uncompromising hand. Critics argue that he acted less like a guide for his citizens and more like a gang leader, enforcing rules with rigid authority and making examples of those who resisted. Small businesses were forced to close under strict orders, while large corporations largely carried on as usual.
So Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote? How so? Math problems? But it's further proof that the most dangerous thing for a leftist is a follow-up question, which is why you never hear any. But I guess questioning elections is okay now. But the best moment came when Walz forgot who he is.
Who is Tim Walz exactly?
It started sort of with picking up on just these little lies he would tell. He never was a command sergeant major, despite the fact him, saying that he was. He never attained this rank in the military. Instead, he abandoned his troops and they were deployed to Iraq without him, and he ran for Congress. So I've always felt as a reporter, if someone lies about little things, they're lying about big things.
That's a principle that stands the test of time.
And Minnesota has become, the home of this defund the police movement. It was on the ballot. Minneapolis did not vote to defund the police, but I would say in every way, shape, or form, they defunded the police. You have Minneapolis Police Department that's lost about 40% of their cops since George Floyd. But instead of being
Minneapolis lost 40% of its cops in 5 years?
One story in particular struck a chord with the public. A law-abiding grandmother who had started a small business as a quiet act of protest found herself facing legal consequences for simply trying to earn a living. Meanwhile, giant retail chains continued operations uninterrupted, highlighting a staggering double standard, according to critics. Even essential classifications seemed inconsistent. Liquor stores remained open, but churches were shut down, raising questions about whether policy was driven by science or political motives. Commentators like Tucker Carlson described the approach as a form of technocratic overreach, where officials dictated not only what people could do, but also how they should feel and when they could step outside. From this perspective, controlling the population seemed more important than protecting public health. Critics argue that adults were treated like children, forced to ask for permission to survive, with their livelihoods sacrificed under the guise of saving lives. A rigid, top-down authority that left many frustrated and fearful. Despite his years in office, Tim Walz's leadership continues to draw skepticism. Critics trace the doubts back to the very foundation of his public persona, pointing to what they describe as a carefully cultivated image that helped advance his career. For years, Walz presented himself as a command sergeant major, a high and prestigious enlisted rank in the U.S. military, one associated with authority, responsibility, and the kind of steady confidence that earns the respect of fellow soldiers.
So I'm the law-abiding grandma that was sentenced to 90 days in jail for opening my business during the shutdowns as a peaceful protest when Minnesota Governor Tim Walz unconstitutionally and illegally shut our businesses down. So my question is, if you were in my situation, would you have done the same thing, or what would you have done?
Well, I flatter myself by imagining I would have done the same thing. Because I think what you did is honorable and necessary.
Dude, you're an old white guy. And you're right, you are a huge disappointment. I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correctly. Because Walz saying old white men suck isn't a political stance, it's his confession. Walz calling people old and white is like Maxine Waters making fun of someone for shopping at Wigs or...
It became essential brand, the seasoned, selfless leader who understood duty. However, some have challenged whether Walz ever truly held that rank. While he served 24 years in the National Guard, records and eyewitness accounts have prompted questions about whether he actually achieved the title he claimed. Critics argue this isn't a minor exaggeration. They describe it as a deliberate misrepresentation, a hoax presented as fact. The controversy deepens when examining his career decisions. Critics note that Walz left the Guard to run for Congress shortly before his unit was deployed to Iraq, framing the move as personal ambition taking precedence over loyalty to his troops. Commentators like Tucker Carlson have suggested that this was not merely a resume boost, but a signal of something more consequential, a willingness to shape a reputation he may not have fully earned in order to gain political advantage. Taken together, these critiques paint a cautionary picture. If someone is willing to embellish or potentially misrepresent key aspects.
5 years ago this summer, George Floyd, a convicted felon, OD'd on fentanyl outside a convenience store in Minneapolis, and the country changed forever. 5 years later, Tim Walz is still the governor. Keith Ellison is still the attorney general. The cops who were falsely convicted of murdering George Floyd are mostly still in prison. But what happened in Minneapolis itself? Well, it's been wrecked. And no one has said a word about it. But I just wonder about this story in particular. Did he have contact with Walz? Do we know that Walz ever, suppose Walz said, I met this guy, ever?
Well, this is what's interesting. We know that he served on a board appointed by Walz. However, I'll say that...
what kind of board was it?
It was a workforce development board.
Of their own history, critics ask, can the public truly trust their leadership in the present? For detractors, this alleged inflation of rank reflects a broader readiness to manipulate perception. For personal and political gain, critics argue that children have been the biggest victims of Walz's politically driven leadership. They claim that, while his administration publicly prioritized equity, Minnesota schools faced a very different kind of crisis. Reading and math scores reportedly declined, and many say the focus shifted from actual learning to ideology, where feelings and social messaging took precedence over facts and academic achievement. Greg Gutfeld famously mocked this approach, remarking under Walz, 2 + 2 = whatever won't hurt anyone's feelings, while phrased as humor. Critics argue it reflects a serious problem. Students were being subjected to what some describe as experimental, progressive social agendas in the classroom, with education suffering as a result. One observer went so far as to call it mediocre ideological indoctrination. According to these detractors, the decline in performance wasn't accidental. They argue it was the predictable result of policies designed to level outcomes at the expense of excellence, essentially avoiding failure, even if it meant fewer students ever truly succeeded.
People misreading Tim's odd greeting. The man of the hour, Tim Walz, brings us our second video of the day, and he's got a very weird way of greeting his wife of 30 years. Roll it.
His wedding anniversary, they were married 5 years after Tiananmen Square, and he picked that date because it was a date that they would remember, he and his wife.
What?
Who does that?
Tiananmen Square?
Correct.
The tank crushing the lone protester? That's
their wedding anniversary. And they went to China for their honeymoon.
Come on. You're sure he picked the anniversary?
They've talked about this in interviews. Yeah, it's just in newspapers.
Tiananmen Square was a massacre of peaceful protesters.
I know.
Do you think they picked it to, like, in the memory of those brave souls who died?
Critics also point to a more personal decision that, in their eyes, signals troubling judgment. On the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, Walz and his wife reportedly chose that day to get married. The date recalls the haunting image of a lone protester facing a tank, a recurring symbol of government force used against its own citizens. Questions quickly rose. Was it ignorance, dark humor, or an unsettling nod to authoritarian power? The story doesn't end there. Following the wedding, the couple reportedly honeymooned in China, a nation notorious for its strict government control, to celebrate their marriage. Critics highlight the extreme irony and poor judgment in the timing and location, framing it as a striking example of insensitivity or, at worst, an implicit admiration for authority taken to an unsettling extreme. A duo of media critics treated Governor Walz like a slow-motion train wreck, just waiting to be dissected each in their own style. Tucker Carlson offered cold, methodical critique, while Greg Gutfeld approached it with humor. As the comedic critic, Gutfeld used rapid-fire jokes and biting sarcasm to expose the absurdity of the situation. He wasn't just mocking Walz. He seemed to take pleasure in unpacking the governor's entire narrative. Gutfeld honed in on Walz's awkward attempts to connect with voters, such as his self-description as an elderly white man and major disappointment, which Gutfeld quipped was the first honest thing Walz had ever said. He also skewered Walz's woke posturing, likening it to telling Joy Behar she wasn't eating enough Doritos, a comparison that struck a chord with viewers. Meanwhile, Carlson assumed the role of the calm, analytical observer of political decline. He methodically deconstructed Walz's record, piece by piece, without raising his voice. Carlson didn't portray him as a calculating villain. Instead, he presented Walz as an overly conventional, even mundane figure, but one whose adherence to bureaucratic procedures made him dangerous in subtle ways. In Carlson's framing, Walz becomes the archetype of a soft authoritarian, the smiling bureaucrat who, following a flawed elite consensus, issues executive orders that ultimately harm the very people he claims to serve. Socioeconomic issues were only part of the story.
One of them, Politico says, is like Walz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is wide eyes. That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that?
Sorry. Critics argue that under Walz, Minnesota's economy teetered on the brink. They describe his administration as a cautionary tale on how not to promote state growth. Businesses operated as if flames were licking at their doors, taxes rose, restrictions multiplied, and policies seemed to stifle innovation rather than encourage it. Walz's staunch commitment to a green energy agenda became the defining feature of his leadership, according to detractors, but they claim it was more symbolic than substantive. Critics say he backed expensive, unpredictable green projects that strained the state's energy infrastructure far more than he admitted during public meetings with teachers or unions. While he spoke endlessly about sustainability, his actions, they argue, were wholly impractical, leaving residents with higher costs and a less reliable system. From this perspective, his initiatives looked like idealistic experiments built on shaky foundations rather than pragmatic solutions for citizens. When cracks inevitably appeared, critics claim he simply shifted blame rather than taking responsibility. By the end, this critique of Walz goes beyond partisan jabbery. It's a case study in modern leadership failure. Gutfeld delivered the comedic blows, turning Walz's missteps into material for laughs, while Carlson provided the measured, courtroom-style dismantling. Together, they portrayed him as a new kind of leader, one who cloaks incompetence behind a veneer of science and compassion, advancing risky ideas while masking the consequences. When the tumult subsides, Walz may not be remembered as the governor who guided Minnesota through challenging times. Instead, he risks being remembered as the man who got roasted mercilessly for bringing a metaphorical zoo to his own public roast, a symbol of how critics see every misstep to amplify his failures.